carry out functions that are primitive, meaning maintain homeostasis. That's what it's doing. So, our pituitary gland, it's known as the hypophysis. And like I was saying, it suspends, you guys remember that little stalk that I showed in the picture? It suspends from that hypothalamus by that stalk, which is known as my infundibulum. Now, the pituitary gland itself, it's made up of an anterior and posterior portion. Like I was showing over here, where we're going to have an anterior and a posterior. Another name for the anterior portion is adenohypophysis, and the posterior is neurohypophysis, telling me that the posterior portion is nervous tissue and the anterior portion is cellular. When you look at it under the scope, they have two different structures. This one gland, two different structures, cellular and nervous. The anterior is the largest portion of the gland. It is linked to the hypothalamus by what is known as the hypophyseal portal system. Portal. What do you think of? Like an opening, like something being able to pass from one side to the next. We're going to find in our bodies we have two portal systems. We have this one, which is part of the endocrine system, and then we have a portal system with the liver. Now, what does it mean? It simply means that I'm going to have a network of capillaries that are going to make their way to a second set of capillaries without the blood going back to the circulatory system. So, as blood flows in, and the chemicals that are made here, they can now flow to this anterior portion by way of that infundibulum through a vascular portal to my second set of capillaries and the anterior pituitary without returning to the bloodstream of the body as a whole. My hypophyseal portal system. Why do you think it exists that way? My hypothalamus controls what the pituitary does. And the anterior pituitary is responsible for certain hormones. The posterior is responsible for certain hormones. So I need what was made in the hypothalamus to make its way to the anterior pituitary so that those cells can carry out what the hypothalamus said to do. And I need it to do that without releasing these into the bloodstream of the body as a whole. I need it to go from here to here, and then from here to the bloodstream as a whole. Does that make sense? Because this is one of the two portal systems we have in our body. It's very important to understand that that's what it does. Okay? So, that hypothalamus is going to control what my anterior pituitary does by sending chemicals from here to affect chemicals made by these cells. Yes, no, maybe. Cool. Okay. The posterior portion is the smaller portion. I still have to have a connection to the hypothalamus from my posterior portion, but this time the posterior portion is nervous tissue, nerves. So this is where I have my neuroendocrine cells. So what we're going to find is that I have some nerve cells in my hypothalamus. They get to travel to my posterior pituitary on the other part of the infundibulum and synapse on cells in the posterior. So those axons pass down the stalk, and this one is called my hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Tract letting us know nerve fibers. Yes, no, maybe? Okay, so in the posterior pituitary, the only two products, oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone, because of the structure, because of the connection, and because of the quick need of these chemicals, well, the ADH, oxytocin, comes along in many different ways. I get to store those products. I don't store any products in my anterior. The posterior stores those two chemicals, the ADH and the oxytocin. So for me to have information To my anterior, it's by way of blood. For me to get information to the posterior, it's by way of nerves. Everybody with me? So what are the hormones? The hormones of the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. That means that we're referring to the hormones that will be in this W. All right? Now, what it's going to do, 6 are going to regulate the anterior pituitary. 2 are going to be for the posterior. Those 2 that I've already mentioned. For the posterior, oxytocin, antidiuretic. Oxytocin, the biggest function is uterine contractions. Antidiuretic, well, like the name implies, if you take a diuretic, you go to the bathroom. So this is anti. It wants to help the body keep water. So those are the 2 in the posterior. The other ones, they're either going to be a releasing hormone. Now, if it's in my hypothalamus, what is it telling to release something? If I'm in my anterior pituitary, but the hypothalamus is sending information about releasing, what is that telling the anterior pituitary to do? Make that hormone and release it. Okay? So then inhibiting is going to say, no, don't release anymore. Why? Why? I might make too much. Do what I mean? I got to maintain homeostasis. Wait a minute. Can I have too much of a hormone? Oh, yeah. Good example. Hyperthyroidism. Can I have too little? Oh, yeah. Hypothyroidism. That can go wrong with all of them. So my goal is to make sure that information picked up from the body that is at the nerve tissue, my brain, okay, is going to say to make it be releasing or inhibiting in control. So that I'm not too much or too little. But it happens all the time. It's one of the reasons we have such a big field of endocrinology. So, releasing, stimulate the pituitary to make something. Inhibit, stop the pituitary from making something. Now, growth hormone. Heard of it? How? Just know it exists, right? How about all these little commercials we see now on TV? Oh, I was feeling so old.